Hello, everyone. Welcome to Interpreting Tradition. I have been reading books for you. Well, I'm still reading them on mainly Catholic um, issues, um, on the Mass, reading on the Mass, and on works of mysticism, my own translations. I have also been reading books in Spanish. I thought that today I'm going to start something different. I will continue with these readings until I finish them, and perhaps I'll start with something else afterwards. But I'm going to do something different, try to do something different with you, which is my intention at the beginning was to discuss um, literature, the books that influenced me more in my life. I am not a scholar. I was a teacher for quite a while, for over 20 years. Mainly, I taught pre-university students, mainly political philosophy and sociology, that kind of thing. I'm retired now. I'm in my 70s, and I thought that I could discuss a few books, a few authors that had a great influence on me. I don't know that this will work. I am not reading. I have hardly prepared my thoughts. But one of the authors that most affected me, most influenced me in my life has been Dostoevsky. And I'm not going to discuss the Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment because there are many people discussing those and much better than I can. But the first writer the first author, Russian author that I read was Gorky. And I think that started my love for Russian literature. I'll tell you how it came about. I was a student at university, was reading politics. And one day with my tutor, this is over 50 years ago, he said to me, "Oh, you come from Spain?" And I said, "Yes." And the usual questions when you are living in a foreign country, well, why did you come here? What, that sort of thing. But so I started discussing we ended up talking about my childhood a little bit. He found it interesting because I was raised by nuns in Catholic Spain. And this was kind of different, strange to him. And he said, "By nuns." He said, "My goodness, but you look rather sane to me." Goodness. And I said, "Yes, I think I am sane. As a matter of fact, I think I am one of the sanest people I know." I was in my 20s, so. And but we were discussing my childhood with nuns, and this was in an orphanage. I was raised by the Sisters of Charity of Saint Vincent de Paul, and I have nothing bad to say about them at all. I'm eternally grateful to them. I must be at the moment one of the few people who have something good to say about them, but I'm not going to talk about that. But he said to me, "My goodness, have you read Gorky?" And I said, "No, who is he?" And he said, "Oh, he's a Russian author. But because of the background in poverty and so on," he said, "Oh, you must read him." So I read Gorky, and it affected me profoundly. I went back to read him again, and it didn't have that effect that second time. But the first time I read him, I thought it was the best book I had ever read or I would read in my whole life. Very briefly, he wrote Gorky. This is at the end of the 19th century, and he wrote a book It's a trilogy. Um, he titled them my childhood, my apprenticeship, and my universities. He never went to university. It was just the experience of life that he had had. And what I remember about it was that he was the first memory that he had of his childhood was his mother on the ground and a man, I don't remember whether it was his father or his stepfather now, um, with his foot on her chest. He says, what I remember is that boot from this man on his chest. That was one of his first memories of in life. He was raised by his grandmother, and his grandmother would go out and beg in the streets, and he would go with her. And because it was so cold, sometimes he would go into this bookshop just to get warm, and pretending that he was still a child, but pretending to look at books and to read them and so on. Of course, there was the shop owner, a very, very kind Jewish man, knew what was happening. And so he came over to him one day and said, can you read? And he lowered his face and his head and he said, no. And he said, well, I tell you what, I will teach you how to read. You have to come every day at this time and I will teach you how to read. And he did. And he went and he learned how to read. And then the nice gentleman would give him books, you know, all the classics, Treasure Island and all those lovely books. And he explains how those books opened his mind to another world, to a different reality, a reality that he had never experienced. All he had experienced was practically begging in the streets. And he read all these books, as many as he could. Anyway, at the age of 11, he got a job on a boat, and his job was to be the assistant to the assistant to the assistant to the cook. His job was to peel potatoes all day long. That is what he did. And at night, he says, all the seamen would come up on deck and they would talk and get drunk or whatever. But they allowed him to be there with them, listening to their conversation. And he started telling them stories, all the stories that he had read in books and things. And sometimes he would just make it up and he would just talk and enjoy that, being with them and having people listening to his stories. And one day something happened that changed his life, and that was that one of the seamen there, half drunk, said to him, "You know, you're very good with words. You should become a student at a university." And he thought, I mean, at the end of the 19th century, who went to university? I mean, you didn't even think about it, of the possibility, but the idea of being a student at a university, it really had an effect on him. And when they, in the next big city, he said goodbye and he actually walked all the way to the university. This is at the age of 11. And he went there and he said, "I'm here to become a student at this university." Well, of course, he never became a student at the university, but he did the next best thing, and that was to get a job in a coffee shop, a bakery shop, very, very near to the university. And his job was to deliver cakes and bread and biscuits to the students. And he loved that because he would go there and he would hang around the students, and the students, they were all so clever, so intelligent. He thought, oh my goodness, this is the they would talk about politics and the revolution coming, and this is pre 1917, obviously, and he thought that they knew so much. He loved it. Um, anyway, one of the students was Lenin, by the way. Anyway, so this is Gorky was my first encounter with Russian literature, and then I moved on to other authors, and I want to talk to you about Dostoevsky. You know those huge books that he has, Crime and Punishment. I read it quite a few times, and like any good book, every time you read it, you get something out of it that you didn't see before. This is what happens with books like Cervantes' Don Quixote, for example. When you read it, when you are young, a teenager or a child, um, you just laugh because it's a funny book. Okay, when you read it at 30, you don't laugh so much. You begin to see other things. By the time you're 70 and you read it, it is rather sad, perhaps. You see different things. You know what I'm talking about. So with Dostoevsky, what I found was that one of the books that impressed me most actually is The House of the Dead. The House, and then another short story, but The House of the Dead. I want to talk to you about The House of the Dead. Now, Dostoevsky, this is in the 1850s, perhaps. He was a student, talking about, I don't know, the revolution against the Tsar, all that sort of thing, that young people wanting to change the world, idealistic, which is good when you're young. And anyway, he got caught. It's a long story, and he was sentenced to death. And just before he was about to get executed, the order came from the Tsar to not to execute them, but to send them to Siberia, to a camp there. So The House of the Dead is basically his own personal experience of being there. One of the things that impressed me most, or affected me, or influenced me, or I don't know how to call it, is when he went there, he started observing people, started observing the people around him. He knew that he was going to be in a little bit of trouble because he was an aristocrat, really, or perhaps if not an aristocrat, certainly a member of what the other criminals considered upper class or upper middle class or something like that. Most of them were illiterate and working men and so on. So he knew that he wasn't going to fit in very well. And instead of trying to say to them, oh, I'm like you, I feel your pain, that kind of thing, he said, no, I am who I am. And if they are unkind to me or whatever, well, I'll just have to endure it, and so on. Eventually, they accepted him. They respected him. He observed how they spoke, the figures of speech, and he was taking note. He had never heard this way of talking, and he was learning. He wasn't at all contemptuous of any of them. He was actually learning. And anyway, one of the things that he observed, which I think is worth thinking about it was this. The serfs in Russia were freed in 1861. This was happening before then. And the punishment, if you misbehave or if you did something in that prison camp, was most of the time was lashes, just scourges and lashes, and 200, 300. There were two ways of doing it. One with, he says stick in the translation. I don't know, a bat, or I don't know what it must have been. But the other one, the most painful one, was with the branch, a branch of a birch tree, and that was really painful because that cut into the skin, and if they continued doing it, it could be obviously rather painful. The skin broke and so on. So they would be punished, 100 lashes, 200, 1,000 sometimes. If the lashes were done with the birch tree, they would stop at a certain point, perhaps 100, 150, and they would stop, and then they would take them to the infirmary, and until for a few days, until the until he healed a little bit, and then they would go back. And he noticed, he was in the infirmary quite a bit himself, and he noticed that the people there, the criminals there, when they were punished, they would come back to the infirmary and they would talk about among themselves about, well, how many lashes did you get? Oh, I've got 200. Oh, really? Well, I only got 150. How many have you got left? I still have 525 left. And they would talk about it normally. That was what was expected, and so on. He was taking note of that, and he noticed something else. The people who were doing the lashes, okay, they were called the executioners, and he noticed this. At first, the executioners would give the lashes, okay, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But he noticed that they knew that they were inflicting pain. They were aware of that. Of course, they continued doing it. It was their job. They had to do it. Otherwise, they would get the lashes themselves. So they would do their job, but he felt that they were aware that they were inflicting pain on another human being. Those were the new ones. After that, after a while, he noticed that that sort of inner empathy started disappearing. So the second stage, as it were, was that there was no empathy at all. They would just do the job. 1, 2, 3, until they got to 200 as a job, but they got used to it. And then there was a third stage, and that was when they felt the power that they had. They wanted the people there, the criminals, the prisoners, to be aware of their power. The experienced captives would therefore, when they went, they would throw themselves, on their knees, pleading, oh, please, I have a wife and 8 kids, and so on and so forth. Of course, they knew that he was going to do his job anyway. He wasn't going to be any kinder to them because of that. But they needed this ritual to let him know, oh, I see that you're powerful, kind of thing. The rookies, the ones who had just arrived, the proud ones, were the ones who said, I'm not going to beg. No, I'm just going to, just grind my teeth. And um, what happened was that the executioners, when they felt that they wouldn't plead and beg, they would go about it much harder. In other words, you acknowledge my power here, and if you don't, you're going to get it, double. So that was kind of the third stage, a demand almost for recognition of power. And then there was a fourth stage that he noticed. And this happened to practically all of them. They went through these stages, all of them. And the fourth stage was that they actually enjoyed inflicting pain. They now got pleasure out of it. Before, in the earlier stage, they wanted the criminals to recognize their power. Now it went beyond that. Now they enjoyed the pleasure of inflicting pain on other people. And he says that this is obviously the most dangerous, because when you get pleasure out of it, that is like a drug. You need more and more and more. You're never satisfied. The pleasure has to increase, just like people who take drugs, they need to take more and more. And so it is never ending. You actually get to that sadism, I suppose. But that happened to practically all of them. They all got to that point. And I thought about this and how it might be, if we can translate this now, forget the 19th century, forget lashes, forget all that. If we can apply it now to today's world, well, no one is lashing anybody. Well, not in our countries anyway. But the stages are there in a different way, but they are there, I think. I have noticed the change. I don't know whether you have noticed it. I don't want to be overly pessimistic or anything like that, but I have noticed the change in our political leaders. When I was young, and certainly even in my middle years, if a politician did something wrong, or was caught at any rate, there was a certain noblesse oblige that you had to resign, or there was some honor or dignity or shame attached to it. You couldn't just have done something terrible or that society considered not good and continue on. I think that has disappeared now. I sense almost a contempt. No, I did that. So what? What are you going to do about it? Of course, they don't say it, but it seems that the sense of dignity is no longer there. The sense of honor is no longer there. I don't see it. Perhaps you do, I don't. And the sense of shame is not there. It's raw power. And yes, so what are you going to do about it? The contempt that they feel for the citizens. I think this is happening in the West. I don't know about other countries, but that is what I have noticed. Anyway, I don't want to prolong this video too much, because I just want to sort of leave it there for you to think about it yourself and see what you think. And if you can, perhaps we can enter into a conversation, you can leave comments or something like that. this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to just things that I have read from my authors or from my favorite authors, or and just discuss them with you and see how we can apply them to today's world and see if we can think about it and learn something from it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I don't know how this is how this has turned out, but I just want to talk to you in this way and see where we get from here. Okay. Thank you again for listening to me. Bye bye.